The Martinez family's farm, located about 30 miles south of Santa Fe, in the heart of the barren and rugged landscape of New Mexico, was a place rich in history, tradition, and generational passion for farming. Founded in the 1920s by Juan Martinez's great-grandfather, it symbolized perseverance and a deep-rooted connection to the land that the family had inhabited for nearly a century. Juan Martinez, the head of the family, was a man with weathered features marked by the relentless desert, sun, and wind. At 58, he had gray hair and a face lined with wrinkles from years of hard work on the farm. He managed the farm with the same determination that had guided his father and grandfather before him. Juan was a quiet and calm man, known for his stoic demeanor, treating every challenge as a natural part of life. He believed that the land on which his ancestors had built their lives was not just a source of livelihood, but a sacred trust to be respected. His wife, Maria, was the heart of the home, a warm, devoted woman who, despite the demanding work on the farm, always found time to care for their adult sons, Carlos and Manuel. Though times were tough, Maria ensured that family life unfolded peacefully, nurturing shared traditions and making every meal with love. Carlos, the older son, was 30 and had helped his father on the farm from a young age. He was a strong young man who knew every inch of the field. Manuel, 5 years younger, had just returned from several years of work in Albuquerque to join the family and help on the farm. Both sons shared a passion for farming and were loyal partners to their father in daily tasks. The family farm was surrounded by wooden fences, behind which cows and horses grazed. 2 dogs, a large black German shepherd named Max, and a smaller white mutt named Luna, guarded the ranch, ensuring that no wild animals approached the herd. The dogs were part of the family, accompanying the Martinez family in all their daily chores. The land on which the farm stood had its own story. It lay in an area rich with old legends and tales passed down by the elder residents. Local lore spoke of ancient Indians, spirits, and strange phenomena haunting these desolate lands. While the Martinez family treated these stories with a grain of salt, the local community believed that New Mexico, especially its desert areas, held deeper mysteries than met the eye. Their home, modest yet sturdy, was the center of their world. Built from traditional sun-dried bricks, typical of the region, it provided shelter from the blazing summer sun and the cold winter winds. The interior of the house was simple, but filled with family heirlooms. Photographs of ancestors hung on the walls, and an old clock that once belonged to Juan's grandfather ticked in the living room, marking the rhythm of their quiet evenings. The family was deeply rooted in the local community. The Martinez family not only traded corn at nearby markets, but was also known for their hospitality. Each year, during the harvest festival, they opened their farm to neighbors and friends, organizing a grand picnic. People from the area gathered to share stories, laugh, and feast together. Before we dive into our story, we have a small request for you. Please subscribe to our channel to stay updated with the content we're gathering. Our channel is still in its development phase, and every subscription, like, or comment is a tremendous support for us. It may seem like a small gesture on your part, but it shows us that our efforts are worthwhile and encourages us to keep creating these videos. Thank you. It was an early morning on June 15th, 2005, when Juan Martinez, as he did every day, rose at dawn. The sun was just beginning to rise over the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The air was still cool, which meant he had a few hours to tend to the crops and animals before the heat of the day took over the area. He pulled on his work clothes, donned an old hat, and headed toward the fields. The usual morning chores gave him a sense of control and order, but something felt different that day. Before he even reached the fence, he noticed the strange behavior of the animals. The cows, which typically grazed peacefully at this hour, were moving restlessly around the pen, mooing and nudging one another. Max, his shepherd dog, was pacing anxiously in the yard, growling toward the cornfields as if sensing something that eluded human perception. "What's wrong with you?" Juan murmured to the animals, glancing uneasily towards the fields. Something nagged at him. Something was off, but he couldn't yet put his finger on it. He took a few steps until he stood at the edge of his cornfields. As soon as his gaze reached deeper into the field, he felt his heart race. For a moment, he thought it was just an illusion. About 50 meters away, in the middle of the field, the corn was flattened in a way he had never seen before. The shapes were enormous, symmetrical, and incredibly precise. And yet not a single stalk was broken. They were merely bent and arranged into intricate patterns. Juan felt a cold shiver in his stomach. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the phenomenon, trying to take in the whole picture. The corn was bent in a circular spiral pattern, as if someone had silently created these designs overnight in just a few hours. "Maria!" he shouted, turning abruptly toward the house. "Come here quickly!" A few minutes later, Maria, holding her apron, rushed out into the yard, surprised by the seriousness in her husband's voice. Her face paled instantly when she saw what Juan was trying to show her. "What is that?" she whispered, stepping closer. With each step, she felt her heart pounding harder. She had never seen anything like it. "I don't know," Juan replied, still fixated on the circles. "But this couldn't have happened on its own. Someone was here." Soon their sons, Carlos and Manuel, joined them after hearing the commotion in the yard. As they stood at the edge of the field, their reactions were similar. First disbelief, then growing unease. Carlos, trying to maintain a sense of reason, approached closer and knelt beside one of the bent stalks. He noticed that the plants weren't broken, but gently bent, as if influenced by some invisible force. "No one could have done this overnight," Carlos said, looking up. "Not without leaving tracks, without some equipment, and not in this way." Juan nodded, still trying to gather his thoughts. Something was very, very wrong. He had farmed this land for years and knew it like the back of his hand. He had never seen anything like this before. He recalled the strange lights he had seen the previous evening. Could that have anything to do with this? As they approached the circle, the whole family felt an odd unease, as if the field contained something unnatural. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest that anyone had come close to the field. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, one none of them had ever smelled before. "We should report this," Maria spoke up, gripping her apron tightly. "We can't leave it like this." Juan nodded, but his thoughts were in chaos. On one hand, he wanted to find some rational explanation. Maybe it was a prank or some secret military experiment. But on the other hand, deep down, he felt that what he had just seen had no human explanation. Evening fell quickly over the farm, as is often the case in the desert, where the heat of the day yielded to the cold gusts of night. Juan sat on the porch, resting his elbows on his knees, while his gaze wandered over the cornfields. Lights began to appear on the horizon again, this time more distinctly, as if they were drawing him in. They flickered with a blue glow, hovering above the ground, slowly moving from one side of the field to the other. "I see them," Maria said softly, sitting down next to him. Her voice was barely audible but filled with unease. She was too shaken to say anything more, so she just held her husband's hand. "Do you think it's those same lights from yesterday?" Carlos asked, standing in the doorway and nervously watching what was happening in the fields. "It's them," Juan replied shortly, not taking his eyes off the lights. They seemed to pulse, as if they had a life of their own. They were entirely different from anything he had seen before. Neither car headlights, nor an airplane, nor flashlights. Everything he knew was ruled out. Juan finally got up and turned to his sons. "We need to report this. Gather up. We're going to Santa Fe." The family climbed into the old truck, and their journey to the city was silent, each lost in their thoughts. When they arrived at the sheriff's station in Santa Fe, Juan and Carlos entered, where they were greeted by a stocky older man in uniform. Sheriff Henry Lopez had known the Martinez family for years and immediately noticed something troubling on their faces. "Juan," "Carlos, what brings you here at this hour?" Lopez asked, looking up from his papers. "You need to see something on our farm," Carlos began, but Juan raised his hand to silence him. "There are strange patterns in the fields. The corn is flattened but not broken, and we saw lights in the sky. It doesn't look normal, Henry." Juan tried to speak calmly, though his heart was racing. The sheriff frowned, his face revealing skepticism. "Lights? Flattened corn? Juan, you know this could be some local pranks, kids or someone messing with farmers." "Not like this, Henry," Juan replied firmly. "You haven't seen it. No kid could do something like this. It's something more." The sheriff sighed, knowing Juan wasn't a man who panicked easily. "All right, I'll come by tomorrow morning and check it out, but I warn you, if it turns out to be just a prank, we won't do anything more about it." Around 3 a.m, something jolted Juan awake. An incredibly intense light flooded through the window, filling the room with a sharp blue glow. He rushed outside, and there, over the field, hovered an object shaped like a flattened disc. Juan felt his legs give way. The light was blinding, and a low, pulsating sound hung in the air, vibrating in his chest. "Carlos! Maria!" he shouted, but his voice barely broke through the strange noise. At that moment, the object began to rise slowly until it suddenly vanished, as if it melted into the air. The entire family ran outside, staring at the sky. The object was gone, but the circles reappeared in the field, even more complicated than those they had seen before. The next morning, Sheriff Lopez arrived at the farm, but what he saw threw him off guard. The circles were incredibly symmetrical, precisely flattened in the corn. No one could have done this without the right equipment, certainly not in one night. There was something else. The air around the circles seemed strangely heavy, and the plants inside had a slightly scorched appearance, as if subjected to intense heat. "Juan, what's going on here?" the sheriff asked, moving from place to place, examining the patterns. Though initially skeptical, he could no longer deny that what he was seeing was not normal. "I don't know, Henry, but this isn't the first time we've seen those lights. And now, it looks like it's going to continue," Juan said, quietly, staring at the circles. The sheriff furrowed his brow and stepped back. "I'll report this. Someone needs to come here and take a closer look. Maybe the military, maybe scientists. What's happening here is beyond my capabilities." That day, Sheriff Lopez made several calls. The Martinez case quickly became a local sensation. Scientists, paranormal researchers, and even journalists from across the country began arriving at the farm. But no investigations, neither scientific nor more speculative, provided definitive answers. Meanwhile, the circles in the corn continued to appear regularly, each night with greater precision and complexity. Around 3 a.m, Juan Martinez suddenly jolted awake. Something had roused him, a disturbing, pulsating sound he couldn't identify. As he opened his eyes, he noticed that the room was flooded with intense blue light streaming in through the window. His heart began to race. This was no ordinary moonlight or car headlights. The light was blinding, almost unnatural, filling every corner of the room with a strangely intangible, ethereal glow. Confused and with a racing heart, Juan quickly got up, placing his bare feet on the cool floor. His breathing quickened, and a sense of danger intensified. He rushed outside, instinctively grabbing a jacket hanging by the door. As soon as he opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the light hit his eyes even more forcefully. He drew in a sharp breath, nearly recoiling from the pressure of the brightness. Before him, above the cornfield, he saw something that seemed unreal. At a height of several meters, hovered a huge, flattened disc. Its surface was shiny, as if made of metal, but with an irregular texture reminiscent of a pulsating liquid. The disc slowly rotated around its axis, and from its underside emanated a blinding light that illuminated the entire field. From this light radiated warmth, yet an incredible chill hung in the air, which Juan felt on his skin. The sound that had awakened Juan became clearer. A low, deep pulsating noise resembling vibrations that resonated in his chest. These vibrations seemed to permeate his entire body, as if the disc was affecting the environment not only visually, but also physically. He felt his legs weaken, as if an invisible force was trying to pin him to the ground. His eyes were wide open, and his mind could not process what he was witnessing. "Carlos, Maria," he called out, trying to break through the low, vibrating sounds. However, his voice seemed muted, as if not only the night but also the strange presence of this object absorbed him. Suddenly, the disc began to move. It slowly rose higher, changing position. For a brief moment, Juan had the impression that something darker, more distinct flashed in the center of the disc, perhaps windows, or something resembling openings through which the light shone. At that moment, Carlos, Maria, and Manuel rushed outside. Surprised and dazed, they stood beside Juan, staring up at the sky. Their faces were pale, and their eyes wide open, unable to tear their gaze away from the strange phenomenon. "What is that?" Maria whispered, her voice filled with fear. Carlos wrapped his arm around his mother, but he couldn't hide his own terror. The disc hovered higher, as if scanning the surroundings, its light pulsating and changing colors, from blue to purple, then to white. At that moment, Juan felt the ground tremble slightly beneath his feet. It wasn't a typical earthquake, but rather a gentle, almost imperceptible vibration that coursed through the entire cornfield. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the object began to accelerate. In the blink of an eye, it vanished from sight, melting into the air as if it had never been there. It left behind only silence, accompanied for a few moments by a faint sound of vibrations, before that sound faded completely. The Martinez family stood in silence, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Their minds couldn't comprehend what had happened. Juan, feeling his body slowly regain control, took a step toward the field. With each step he took, he saw more clearly. New circles had appeared in the field, even more complicated and larger than the previous ones. The patterns were perfectly symmetrical, forming something resembling spirals and geometric figures that seemed almost impossible to achieve by human hands. Each circle looked as if it had been engraved into the ground with surgical precision. Carlos knelt by one of the circles, gently touching the bent corn. This time, not only were the plants bent, the earth at the center of the circles appeared slightly scorched, as if subjected to immense energy. "The ground is hot," he said softly, extending his hand. A metallic scent hung in the air as if something invisible had passed through this place. Maria looked at her husband, her face pale as a canvas. "This is impossible. Something is happening here, Juan. This thing does not belong to this world." Juan was silent, staring at the circles. Everything he had previously believed, his entire reality, was beginning to unravel. He knew one thing. What they had witnessed could not be a coincidence or a joke. It was something he could not comprehend, something that eluded all rational explanations. But what was it? And what else was about to happen? For the following days and then weeks, the Martinez farm was enveloped in a strange, tense calm. The UFO had not returned. Every night, Juan, Maria, and Carlos anxiously looked at the sky, as if expecting that disk to once again fill the emptiness over the cornfield with its blue glow. However, the sky remained dark and empty, as if what they had seen was merely one inscrutable episode. Yet, despite the object not returning, something had changed, both on the farm and within the family. The circles in the field, while not growing, still served as a reminder of that night. The soil where they lay seemed different, drier, as if it had been through a wave of heat. Even the corn surrounding the circles, which initially appeared merely bent, slowly began to wither, as if touched by some invisible ember. Juan watched these fields with unease every day, wondering if the place was now forever marked. The animals on the farm had also changed. The dogs, once happily running around the property, were now quiet and restless, often hiding in the darkest corners of the barn. The cows and horses, typically calm, started to behave aggressively and were afraid to approach the fields, as if sensing that something was wrong there. Sometimes, Juan caught himself avoiding looking at the sky. He could no longer gaze at the stars with the same tranquility he once had. Something within him had changed irrevocably, like he understood that we are not alone, that something else, something greater, could disrupt their simple, farming reality at any moment. Days passed, and Juan found himself increasingly talking about that night only with Carlos. Maria, still shaken, avoided the topic as if she wanted to forget what she had seen. In her eyes grew a belief that touching the inexplicable could only lead to madness. She began attending church more frequently, praying for peace and understanding, but no longer mentioned the lights or the circles in the corn. However, in Santa Fe and among the local community, the story of the circles and strange lights began to take on a life of its own. News of what had happened on the Martinez farm spread quickly. Despite Juan and his family trying to avoid the spotlight, people increasingly came to visit, some curious, others full of skepticism. Journalists, scientists, and even paranormal investigators arrived. Everyone wanted to see the circles with their own eyes and try to unravel the mystery. One day in July, a group of scientists from the University of Albuquerque came to the farm. They were sent by local researchers studying atmospheric phenomena, attempting to explain what was happening on the farm. They set up measuring devices and collected soil and plant samples. However, the results that came in a few weeks later only deepened the mystery. The soil in the circles showed signs of intense thermal interaction. Yet, there were no signs of fire or natural causes for the sudden scorching of the plants. The corn, though bent, was not broken. Something had distorted it with a precision they could not explain. "It's as if someone used some form of energy we don't yet understand," one of the scientists said during a conversation with Juan. "But no known technology is capable of producing something like this." Juan listened in silence, unable to respond to these explanations. Scientists came and went, but no one was closer to solving the mystery. With each expert who left the farm in disbelief, Juan began to doubt that he would ever find out what really happened that night. Despite attempts to return to normalcy, the circles in the field served as a reminder of the mystery that still hung over the farm. Although the disc never returned and the lights in the sky disappeared, the unease that lingered over the Martinez family remained. There were nights when Juan awoke, swearing he could hear that low pulsating sound that had once pulled him from sleep. Each time, he would rise and, heart pounding, step onto the porch, ready to see what he feared the most. But the sky remained dark and calm, and the only sound was the distant noises of the desert. Over time, people began to lose interest. Life on the farm returned to normal, and the story of the UFO, which had briefly been a sensation, slowly faded into obscurity. Yet for the Martinez family, that night never became a part of the past. In each of their hearts remained the feeling that they had witnessed something greater, something that eluded human understanding. Juan, although he tried to run the farm as before, never looked at the world in the same way again. He was a man with more questions than answers. Deep down, he knew that what he had seen that night was not an ending, but merely a part of something larger. Something that might never happen again, but had forever changed the way he viewed the world and the sky. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.